Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Compassion & Choices annual fundraising event. I'd like to ask you to take your seats. We have an excellent program today. I know a lot of you here, and I'm really excited that we have a full house today and a very exciting program. Thank you all for coming.
When you realize that you're going to die and then you learn how you're going to die, you have choices to make. And those choices aren't easy.
Brittany was a captivating personality. Everyone who saw her felt she was a friend.
Pay attention to your relationships. Pay attention to what you value, to who you spend time with, to what you choose to make important in your daily life. If something is gonna get taken away from you quickly, it's not the stuff of life that's going to matter to you at all. I looked at passing away in hospice care in California, and I really didn't like what that would have looked like for me. I have a tremendous sense of relief now that I've had the prescription filled and it's in my possession.
It was Brittany that was in control of things, and there was such an amount of relief in that. She didn't have to be terrorized by that tumor any longer.
I decided to share my story, and that wasn't an easy choice to make, but I decided to share it because I felt like this issue of death with dignity is misunderstood by many people in our community and culture.
Brittany's video appeared on people.com first thing in the morning, October 6, 2014. By that afternoon, it broke all the records. Over 400,000 people came to Brittany's website and took action. By the time she died, a little over 3 weeks later, over 100 million people worldwide knew her and knew her cause.
We were all very surprised. We knew that, I'm sure it might get some attention, and the point of her speaking up was to hopefully influence, more importantly, move legislators to do something.
The freedom of death with dignity, it exists because it's a choice. I chose this for myself. I would never sit here and tell anyone else that they should choose it for them. But my question is, who thinks that they can sit there and tell me that I don't deserve this choice?
Brittany and I then had that conversation, and she was asking, well, is this something that you want to be involved in? Essentially asking, is this something that you can do? And once we got to that point, then I told her that I would do it whatever I possibly could.
Brittany came on the scene and set in motion a chain of events that passed an aid and dying bill through the California legislature less than 1 year after her death. We had been trying to do that since 1991.
The expression on her face relates how she would be feeling now today, of pride and happiness that this bill now can move forward, get to the governor's desk, and hopefully become law so that terminally ill Californians can stay here in California and have a gentle dying process.
My daughter's choice in dying the way she died were her gift to the world, and it was done with love.
What we've done in the legislature has only been made possible because of what Compassion & Choices has organized throughout the state, throughout the nation.
Brittany's emergence made lawmakers all over the country want to introduce bills to solve the problems that she illustrated. To give you an example, in 2014, there were aid and dying bills in 4 states. Immediately after Brittany's emergence on the scene, lawmakers in 25 jurisdictions, plus the District of Columbia, introduced bills.
Well, Emily was terminal. I knew it. She knew it. She essentially had said goodbye to all her friends. And she asked me for sleeping pills so that she could sleep permanently. We had this conversation a couple of times, and as a physician, I just knew it was against the law, but I had no idea that it was legal in 5 other states.
Sometimes when life presents you with opportunities to do something that's important, it's really important not to turn your back on that opportunity. And so I'm just really trying to follow what I believe in my heart and in my mind is right.
It was kind of a perfect match. If you will, we were ready as an organization to lift our sails. And the wind of Brittany's message filled our sails. And so now we are under full sail ahead. I don't think anything could stop us now.
It's my privilege to welcome everyone to this event, which every year is a mix of sadness and celebration in such a bittersweet way. I am Rabbi Ariel Stone, a proud member of the Advisory Board of Compassion and Choices of Oregon. And I want to underscore Brittany's powerful message by sharing with you for just a quick moment why I am a proud supporter of this necessary legal support, not despite the Jewish values I represent, but from them. Unlike American law, Jewish legal and wisdom literature speak not of rights, but of human responsibilities and privileges that flow from our awareness that life is a gift to be honored and respected. 2 verses set up our dialectic. Choose life from the book of Deuteronomy, and the familiar verse from Ecclesiastes, there is a time to be born and a time to die. One of the great purposes of religion is that of helping us to face our own human finitude. We all face death. We are commanded to pass through death as we have passed through life, doing the best we can to uphold the ethical values that give meaning to our lives. Humility is our common value here, not arrogance. Jewish religious values celebrate life, but not as an end in itself. Religious writings make it clear that life is meant to be lived as an expression of one's values and sense of meaning. Life is not an absolute value. It is a value relative to its meaning. By teaching that we are all equally created as reflections of the image of God, Jewish religious values teach respect for each individual, including respect for choices made by others with which we do not agree, but which are thoughtfully and meaningfully reached. Jewish religious values recognize that we individuals interact in community and teach us that we must take great care with each other and that the world itself depends upon it. Regarding the concern that the law could be cause for abuse or disrespect for human life, Jewish religious values call it sin when we fail to act for others, hiding behind the fear that something bad might happen when we are invited to act for an ideal. We are called upon not to inflict our fears upon each other, but to show courage in our lives and in our own and each other's deaths. My Jewish religious values teach that our responsibility to each other is to help each other achieve a life of meaning. Since life and death are integrated in an individual's existence, a good death is the best end of a good life. Jewish wisdom literature interprets the biblical phrase, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," as meaning, therefore, choose an easy death for your neighbor. Jewish sources absolutely prohibit any act that constitutes an obstacle to the natural process of dying. In modern terms, obstacles to death may include ventilators, they may include feeding tubes, they may include a lack of compassion or the courage to express it among those who surround a dying person. Judaism's prohibition against suicide is observed as a case of l'hatchila lo b'diavad ein. In principle, no. After the fact, yes. Which is to say that simple compassion for human suffering must always temper law. The individual's real life is not to be sacrificed to abstract principle. A death with dignity law reassures those who are nearing death that they need not be afraid, that death can be as good and as meaningful as life. This is a profoundly beautiful expression of the Jewish law that the dying are to be considered for legal purposes like one who is alive for every purpose, not less than human, with their choices taken away and their dignity shredded, but worthy of the same respect, capable of wielding the same power over their lives until their very last moments, as they did in their days of health, as all of us should have the right to do at every juncture of our lives. This is what it means to choose life and to demonstrate the value of life all the way through human life until its end.
Thank you, Rabbi Ariel, for those fantastic words. There's a saying, my grandfather was a minister, and there was a saying that he had that you had to know when to talk and you had to know when to say amen. I feel like I should just say amen to that, so thank you, Rabbi. My name is Matt Whitaker, and I'm the Oregon State Director with Compassion and Choices, and today it is my pleasure, my privilege to welcome you to this luncheon where we share our successes over the past year, and we celebrate together as we reconfirm our support for this important issue. Before I start sharing what's happened over the last year, I think it's only appropriate to thank some people in the room and to recognize some people in the room. And the first group that I'd like to recognize is those of you that this is your first time attending a Compassion and Choices Oregon luncheon. So if that's you today, I want to embarrass you a little bit. Would you stand up so that all of us can thank you for being here? Thank you for being here. I hope that it's the first of many of these that you attend. Compassion and Choices is the nation's oldest nonprofit that works to improve care and expand choice at the end of life. And what that means is that we try to make sure that people have all the choices necessary when they approach their dying process so that they can go about it in a way that is reflective of the way that they've lived up until the very end. And so I'm excited to share with you the things that we've done in Oregon along those lines over the past year, but there are a couple more people that I want to embarrass first. So first, if you are a healthcare provider, a nurse, a doctor, a social worker, anything in the allied health profession, if you'll stand up and let us celebrate you. The other group I'd like to recognize is any political leaders who may be present today. Elected officials, would you stand up and let us thank you for coming here today? Wonderful. Thank you so much for continuing to stand up for what you believe in and for being here today to show that to all of us. The other group that I'd like to recognize is all of those who sponsored this luncheon today. Would you stand up, sponsors, and let us thank you? Just a couple more, I promise. Those of you that are table captains today that invited your friends here, go ahead and stand up as well. Some of you are doing double duty on this. Wonderful. And the last group that I want to recognize, and they're really going to hate that I do this because these are behind-the-scenes people who really don't like to take the credit, but they deserve it because this is a beautiful event, is our event committee that helped make this possible. So would Susan Woods, Brian Reuter, Don Nelson, Betsy Moss, Michael Marqueschi, Renee Holzman, Megan Cole, and our co-chairs, Charlene Zeidel and Governor Barbara Roberts, please stand up and let us thank you. This is a beautiful event. And there's actually one more group that I have to thank. Everything that you hear today that has happened in Oregon and across the country would absolutely not be possible were it not for the volunteers at Compassion and Choices. This is the most dedicated group of people that you will ever encounter. Not only do they go out and advocate on the behalf of people across the state, they also are right there side by side with people that are weighing their choices, being a non-judgmental third party and modeling for the rest of the community what it looks like to walk alongside somebody. So if you will join me, I would really like to celebrate our Compassion and Choices Oregon volunteers and the amazing work they do. So would our client service volunteers, our outreach volunteers, and our advisory board and medical directors please stand so that we can recognize you. Fantastic. Thank you for the work that you do. Well, I'm excited today to share with you some of the things that have happened over the last year. For those of you that were here last year, we talked about a newly launched access campaign. And the goal of that campaign was to improve awareness around end-of-life choices and options here in Oregon, because we knew that all too often people called us wanting to know what their options were, and it was too late. They simply did not have all the pieces of material that they needed. Healthcare providers would call us and they didn't know where to turn for help and support. And so we launched this year-long campaign to try to make sure that people knew what all exists here in Oregon. I'm excited to share with each of you the great success that we've experienced over the last year. As I said, our first goal was that we wanted to increase public awareness. And in order to do that, we launched 5 outreach teams across the state. We took some of our most experienced volunteers who had worked with clients across the state, and we trained them up and made sure that they were equipped with all the tools necessary to speak to groups of people. And through that, we ended up actually training 20 outreach speakers. And those are people who are able to go out and talk in communities at any place where groups intersected. Our goal was that we wanted to hold 17 presentations last year. We wanted to be in 17 places talking to people about their end-of-life options. I am proud to report that last year we held 65 events across the state of Oregon. That's a 368% growth. If you're a numbers person like me, that's pretty exciting. So I'm excited to share that with you. Our other goal was that we wanted to increase the knowledge that healthcare providers had about all of these end-of-life options, starting with the presupposition that doctors, nurses, social workers, all of these people want to provide the absolute best care possible to patients that walk through their doors. But they don't always have all the resources necessary. Our goal was that over the years, we would have a 10% increase in the number of physicians here in the state of Oregon who prescribed under our Death with Dignity Act. We reached out to hospices, to hospitals, support groups, conferences, anywhere that we could intersect and partner with people. And we utilized our medical directors all across the state. In fact, I think they probably logged more mileage than the rest of us traveling around and presenting to different groups. And I am once again proud to share with you that in just 1 year, the number of prescribers under our Oregon law increased 33%. And last, we wanted to make sure that we were still able to serve as many clients as possible as we went out and we presented to these groups. And so our goal was that as people found out about their options, that we would be able to respond to a 10% increase in clients over the year. Our goal was that we would serve 466 people last year. They would call us and we would be able to provide the support that they needed. I am proud, incredibly proud, to say that last year we served 792 clients across Oregon. Through our targeted outreach to medical providers and because of your contributions last year and your support, we are confident that in 2015, access to end-of-life choice in Oregon was at an all-time high. It's something to be proud of, all of you who are a part of it. So where do we go from here? Well, last year we talked about the public. Last year we talked about healthcare providers. This year we're going to the public, and we have a pithy little video that I think will outline for those of you that are new to the organization exactly what we encountered, what we've done, and where we're going from here. So can we go ahead and play the video?
18 years ago, Oregonians passed the Death with Dignity Act, a landmark law that gave mentally competent, terminally ill individuals the option to exercise control over the end of their life in consultation with their loved ones, friends, and healthcare team. Despite 18 years of history, full access to the law is still not guaranteed for all Oregonians. Many healthcare providers don't have the information and support necessary to help patients making this choice. And many Oregonians don't know all their end-of-life options. So how do we ensure end-of-life options are available for all Oregonians? That's where the Access campaign comes in. Over the past year, advocates across the state have presented to over 60 groups, focusing specifically on healthcare providers. Relying on our medical directors, volunteers, and people like you, we've worked to establish new networks of support. And it's working. This past year, the number of physicians participating in Death with Dignity rose 34%. That's the first increase in the last 6 years. Where do we go from here? It's time to take our message to the public and turn quiet supporters into advocates so our network continues to grow. Patients talking to doctors, doctors talking to patients, doctors talking to doctors, and working together with other states across the country to learn and grow our movement together. Let's continue to make Oregon the leader in end-of-life choice and care. With your support, we can.
Well, over the next year, as you've seen, we plan not only to shift our focus here in Oregon, but already, due to our success, as you just saw, and with your support over the last year, our Access campaign has been launched in New Mexico, in Vermont, and Montana, and now preparations are underway to launch in California. That's big news, right? I can say with confidence that we've surpassed last year's goals. We've expanded our Access campaign to Bend, to Southern Oregon, to Corvallis, and more. And in addition, your support has helped us develop a blueprint for other states so that they can bring end-of-life options to their citizens as well. Oregon continues to be the leader. In 2016, we'll be challenged to implement Death with Dignity in California and other states. This will build on the groundwork that we've done here in Oregon, requiring planning and coordination from Compassion and Choices to help each of these states realize their goals, their potentials, and make sure that their citizens have the options that they need. I'd like each of you to open up your program, if you will. And on the inside there, you'll see a fact sheet. And my instructions for you are I want you to take that fact sheet and I want you to sit it in any space that you have around your plate and keep that right there throughout the luncheon and revel in those successes. The other thing that I want you to do is if the table captains will go ahead and open, there are some white bags on top of the table. Inside that bag, you'll find an envelope and a card, a pledge card, a card to pledge your support to our movement, to the successes that you'll see today. And I don't want you to write anything in it right now. But throughout the course of this luncheon, I am confident that you'll experience deep personal emotions. But more so, as I hope you've just seen, you'll be confident that Compassion and Choices is an organization that follows through on its promise to never stop working until every Oregonian, every American, has access to a full range of end-of-life options. And I ask that as you listen to the stories shared today and as you reflect on the successes that I just shared and that you'll see in that handout, today at this fundraiser, I encourage you to donate a significant gift for you that continues to support the important work that we're doing together. We rely on funds raised at these events to guarantee the fulfillment of these promises. The promises that were made last year at this luncheon, the promise that was made to Frank Roberts that you'll hear about, the promise that was made to Brittany Maynard. And with that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce my personal hero, someone I look up to and greatly respect, Dr. Pete Reagan, our National Medical Director for Compassion and Choices.
I'm extremely humbled to, that's breathtaking, and I feel the same way about Matt. So what I'd really like to do first is to take about 27 seconds and appreciate what Governor Jerry Brown did. He really didn't have to sign that bill. And when he did, he wrote a signing statement that described the process that he went through himself this process of discernment in signing that bill. And it became very, very clear that when he signed that bill, he understood in a very deep way what it felt like to sign a prescription. And it was very lovely to feel that common experience with the Governor of California, and I deeply appreciate his act. So here's my next honor. I can hardly stand that I've gotten this one too, but it's a poignant one. But I need to invite Nancy to come up on stage. Now, you don't have to stand in front of it. If you want to stand behind me, it's okay, whatever you'd like to do. But I'm going to tell a little story about my granddaughter because it really reminds me of Nancy. When she was 5, my granddaughter, we were told to go to the final performance of her circus camp because she was going to be the star. And so we go to this performance, and our granddaughter spent the entire performance hiding behind a chair. And all the other kids did pretty cool things, and it was really, it's like she wasn't going to do it. So finally, at the end of the performance, all the adults are getting coats together and finding their kids, and there's a lot of activity, people milling around the room. Picture this room in a half an hour. And turn around and notice that my granddaughter was standing on one foot on top of a 3-foot beach ball. just sort of looking around to make sure nobody was watching. And I want to say that Nancy's been doing that for 18 years at Compassion and Choices. Thank you. It's just, Nancy has been really much more behind the scenes than in front. You guys have all seen her in the past and in some ceremonial roles, but honest to gosh, Nancy's always there. It's just, well, where do we get the next prescription because of some glitch in the drugs? Nancy's there. What do we do about this particular situation that Nancy tells you? It's just, she's been a quiet leader. She's been so balanced and such a tremendous force in this movement that there's no way on earth that any of us can have seen all of what she's done or really appreciate it enough. It's my honor to do our collective best in that. Nancy, from the bottom of my heart, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. And now I get my hug.
Just a minute. I don't want to. This is a sad moment. It's a very happy moment. I would not have been able to do my job for 18 years without the help of every single volunteer, staff member, especially George Amy, who got us rocking and rolling as Compassion and Choices of Oregon. It's been a wonderful ride. It has been an incredible honor to be able to facilitate what people want. That's what it's all about. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reagan, and thank you, Dr. Crumpacker. It's now my privilege to recognize our Volunteer of the Year for Compassion and Choices Oregon. A year ago, when we started this access campaign, it was unclear as to just how much we were going to be able to accomplish, especially in areas outside of Portland. And I can remember traveling down to Medford on an early flight, and I was introduced to Diana Spade. And it became very obvious that we were going to accomplish quite a lot. Diana quickly stepped into the role of outreach team leader in Medford. She took on a great deal of responsibility, and she worked autonomously, presenting to dozens of groups throughout the year, once 3 in a day. I remember I called her and I said, Diana, this person just called and asked if they could have a presentation. She said, well, what time? I've got 2 that morning. And she made it work. Diana, we are so fortunate to have you here at Compassion and Choices. And today I'm proud to announce to everyone that as of just a month ago, Diana has agreed to step into the role of Oregon Medical Director. Did I mention she's a doctor? Yeah. So please join me in congratulating and appreciating Diana Spade. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a true champion for our movement. A person who dedicated her career to helping ensure end-of-life options throughout the country. Telling her story, and in it the story of Oregon, today she is sharing the story of how she came to be involved in the movement and hopes that you too will be inspired. Join me in welcoming to the stage Oregon's 34th governor, Governor Barbara Roberts.
Thank you. I'm not quite as tall as Matt, maybe in my next life. Before I begin the story I want to tell you, I would like to acknowledge one other person in the room. Some of you have seen that the second edition of my book on death and grieving is over on the table today. These are the first copies that have been available of the new second edition. And I would like to introduce Maureen Michelson, the publisher from New Sage Press that has twice published my book. Maureen. Part of the way a story gets told is to have a publisher who believes in the story. Back in the late 1980s, my husband Frank was serving in the state Senate. He was one of the longest serving members of the Oregon legislature and a Senate leader with an extensive progressive record. We were both elected officials at the time, but earlier, he had been my political mentor and hero when I made my first foray into the legislature as a part-time citizen advocate for handicapped children. He remained my hero. Over dinner one evening, Frank shared with me his plans to introduce legislation to help terminally ill Oregonians end their life when pain and deterioration left them no quality of life. I was not immediately supportive. I counseled Frank that such a bill would be highly controversial. Over the last few years, Frank had faced a quadruple heart bypass and prostate cancer. His cancer treatment had damaged his spinal column and left him permanently in a wheelchair. But this bill was not about him, he explained. It was a right that every person should have at the end of life and as the end of life neared. It was about choice, about dignity, about compassion. Frank introduced the bill, ignoring my counsel, of course. Yet, in spite of his status as a Senate leader, his bill never even received a hearing. The next session, Frank reintroduced his bill with exactly the same results. In the third session, he again reintroduced his Death with Dignity bill, determined this time to get a hearing, to give voice and public awareness to this important issue. Late in the session, Frank got his hearing. No action, just a hearing. Frank called it a sympathy hearing since it followed Frank's public announcement that he had been diagnosed with metastasized cancer of the lungs. It was a terminal diagnosis. But Frank got his hearing, and he got something even more vital to his cause. He got supporters. Barbara Coombs-Lee was on committee staff that session. Others in the hearing room gave support to the bill, and they all formed a staunch group ready to act when the legislature failed to do so, which they did. Plans and activity began quickly on a citizen initiative petition to place the Death with Dignity issue on the Oregon ballot. Frank was thrilled about the citizen action. He trusted that the work of these early advocates would lead to success. When the 1993 legislature adjourned, Frank, tired and hurting, came home to the governor's residence. He came home to die. It was August, and we both understood that his terminal prognosis of 1 year to live was narrowing down to what was likely the final 3 or 4 months of his life. More and more often, I tried to bring briefcases of work home to accomplish my needed work as governor. I wanted to be home with Frank every opportunity I could make happen. It was a challenging balancing act between my job and my love. Every couple of days, Frank would ask how the signature collection process was doing in the Death with Dignity petition, and I would give him the positive updates, and he would respond each time saying, "If this measure reaches the ballot, I know Oregonians will support it." And each time I agreed. As the fall of 1993 continued, Frank knew full well that this ballot process would last into the 1994 election season. He understood he would die many months before the law could be in place. But Frank always understood that this bill was not about him. I, on the other hand, understood that if the legislature had acted when Frank first introduced his bill, he would now have the option to end his suffering. I knew clearly that he would have used the law. Watching him deteriorate in those last weeks, I fully understood why Oregon so desperately needed the law. And I told Frank I promised him I would support the ballot measure and add my voice to the campaign and to the movement. Just as he had mentored me 20 years ago in learning the legislative process, he was again my teacher on end of life. Frank died on October 31st, 1993, as I knelt beside him and gave him permission to let go, to die. He remained my hero to the end. In 1994, as governor of Oregon, I endorsed the Death with Dignity ballot measure. In November of that year, Oregon voters passed the measure by 51%. Frank had believed in the Oregon voters. He had been right every step of the way. Over the last years, I have fulfilled my promise to Frank to advocate for this special human mission. When the measure reached the ballot in the state of Washington, I traveled across the Columbia River with George Jamie to urge Washington voters to join their fellow Northwest citizens in Oregon in support of their ballot measure. I made 2 trips to Vermont to testify and to encourage their legislators to pass their version of our law. The 3rd time, snowed in at an airport on my way to Vermont, I testified to the Vermont Senate Committee by telephone. I did press events, supporter meetings, and finally testified to the California Senate Committee. I met with 3 governors in those 3 states and told them how proud and grateful I felt about giving my citizens this remarkable end-of-life choice. With the success in Washington State and Vermont, and the huge latest success in California, I feel I am still acting in Frank's behalf to carry his message and his cause to millions of terminally ill Americans. It has become my cause. Yet our work is not finished. We still have promises to keep. And now, it is my special privilege to introduce a spouse, a loving husband who knows fully what it means to keep the most difficult of promises. Dan Diaz and his wife Brittany left their home in California, became residents of Oregon to allow Brittany end-of-life choices not available at that time in their home state. With self-determination, bravery, and surrounded by love, Brittany carried out her wishes for a peaceful and dignified exit. Now you will meet the spouse who shared Brittany's journey and for the past year has carried out the promise that he made to her. I am truly honored to introduce to you Dan Diaz, a wonderful leader, compassionate friend of ours, and a person who has made a huge difference in the past year. And the success we have just seen in California is partly on his shoulders in a means of acknowledging that success. I think, where did Matt go? I know Dan is there, but where is Matt? Before Dan speaks, I would like to have him come to the stage. Last night at a small reception that we attended, we intended to present to Dan this red-tailed brown hawk. And you will notice, and those of you who've been around Compassion a long time will notice the connection the brown hawk has to Oregon's Compassion and Choices movement. If you look at my book, you will see the red-tailed brown hawk on the front. And last night I shared with Dan the story of Frank Roberts' life ending and my saying to him, "Fly like the hawk." So today we are going to present to Dan this remembrance of Oregon's Compassion in Dying as our gratitude for what he and Brittany have done for the movement, for our state, for his state, and for the nation. Dan.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Diaz, and I am Brittany Maynard's husband. I was asked to share Brittany's story with you today, but this will not be the version of the story that I've told over the past year to senators and assembly members while providing testimony at judicial hearings in my efforts to help pass that legislation in California. That version of the story contained numbers and statistics and polling data. Today, I will share Brittany's story in the context of our collective humanity, the human side of what she went through. Brittany and I met on April 30th of 2007. It was a Monday night. I still remember the specific portions of our conversation from that evening. The sound of her laughter, hearing it for the first time. The conversation between Brittany and I was effortless. We went on a few more dates, and it didn't take long for us to quickly decide that we were a couple, boyfriend and girlfriend. I find myself looking forward to seeing Brittany every evening after work. We spent most of our free time together. I was at her place, or she was at mine. We were falling in love. Brittany and I would take weekend trips to California's wine country. That was easy enough. It was an hour-and-a-half drive from where we lived at the time. Or we'd go to a friend's lake house and spend the weekend on the water. We took a trip to New York, another trip to Chicago. So what happens when two people are falling in love? You find yourself being affectionate and playful. You become supportive of one another's goals and their aspirations. You establish trust. You laugh and you smile a lot. We certainly did. You learn about the other person, and maybe just as importantly, you learn about yourself and how much this new person in your life means to you. Brittany and I were together for 3 years, and then we were apart, broken up for a full year. Love, it seems, sometimes it takes a detour. It did for us. When we got back together, we were reminded of how truly connected we felt to one another. We shared so much in common, our interests, our goals in life. We talked about wanting a family. Brittany wanted 2 kids. I thought 3 or 4 sounded better, but we agreed that we would figure that out when it came up. We were engaged and then married in 2012. We bought a house and started settling into our lives together. That was the slide I was expecting earlier. This is also when that little mongrel showed up. I included a picture of the dog intentionally. It's amazing the love and support that we humans derive from our four-legged companions. So this is Charlie. This was a photo that became rather iconic of Brittany. And so when he first showed up, this is what he looked like next to our dog that we'd already had, which is a beagle. Keep your eye on the beagle because she, of course, remains the same size. But 9 months later, so that's our family. 125 pounds. A few months after our wedding, Brittany started having headaches that would wake her up in the middle of the night. She'd get sick, be unable to sleep. The headaches seemed to subside for a few months with the prescription for migraines that a specialist had given her. But by the end of 2013, by the end of that year, the headaches were back. On New Year's Eve, while we were at a trip in wine country that Brittany had planned, I had to take Brittany to the hospital because the pain was getting too intense that day, and something just seemed terribly wrong. She was transferred to a hospital closer to our home, and after an MRI, we discovered that Brittany had a brain tumor. That it was very large, and that there was no cure, only certain treatment options. Brittany endured an 8-hour brain surgery, simply to debulk, essentially to create enough space in her skull so that the current symptoms would subside. 3 to 5 years of life was the time frame that she was given. Just 2 months later, the tumor suddenly showed signs that it was growing aggressively, and they then informed Brittany that 6 months was all the time she had left. So what does one do in the middle of all this chaos, of all this stress? Well, we turn to one another for mutual support, for caring, for tenderness, for understanding. In the middle of the night when you're laying in bed, when we're laying in bed and she can't sleep, we hold one another, never wanting to let go. Brittany was determined to live, and we researched every treatment option that was available. The tumor was still growing, of course, and Brittany's health was deteriorating. There was no cure that could save her life. And unfortunately, the treatment options that were available, chemotherapy and radiation, those might give her 2 or 3 months on the back end, but she would start feeling horrible now, or immediately at that time. I'm not afraid to die, Brittany told me one day. I'm not afraid of death. Death does not have that power over me. This just happens. Don't worry, it passes. Those words were not lip service coming from Brittany. I knew she truly meant it. She did not fear dying. But I am afraid of suffering, she said, especially since I will die anyway. I would prefer to die gently, not struggling and in pain. Early on, Brittany had brought up the topic of medical aid in dying. We talked about it, and I absolutely understood where she was coming from and the logic of this program. The fear
of being tortured to death if the brain tumor was allowed to run its course. That was the one thing that terrorized Brittany. The reality that she would have to endure pain that could not be alleviated or even controlled with Dilaudid. Dilaudid, by the way, it's 4 times stronger than morphine, and she was already on pretty hefty doses of Dilaudid. Seizures that become increasingly frequent and severe. Personality changes where one minute the individual seems normal, and the next minute they are agitated, cruel, violent. The probability that she would go blind as the tumor grows in her brain and starts pressing on different parts. The likelihood that she would lose the ability to write and communicate altogether. It's not uncommon for the brain tumor to cause a stroke. And then depending on what part of the brain is damaged due to lack of oxygen during the stroke, she could lose motor function, the ability to stand, walk, and swallow. Partial paralysis is common and complete paralysis a possibility. Brittany said, "I will not die that way. Why should I have to?" Brittany decided to live her life to the fullest. I took a leave of absence from work. Brittany found a house for us to rent here in Portland, established residency. We found a new medical team. We packed up half our house in California into a U-Haul. We drove 600 miles north. Nobody should have to go through that at their end of life, having to leave home like that. Brittany then applied for, qualified for, and was granted the prescription for medical aid in dying. But that wasn't her focus. Brittany's passion was being outdoors in nature. So we went to Yellowstone National Park, a spot she had wanted to visit for years. A few weeks later, she was hiking glaciers in Alaska with her friend and her mother. It was during that trip when Brittany was in Alaska that I went to pick up the prescription. When Brittany returned from Alaska, she put the medication in the cupboard, and we focused on living life. We focused on love. We went to Olympic National Park in Washington, Hood River in Oregon, and we took a helicopter tour of the Grand Canyon. Up until Brittany received the medication, she could not escape the torture that the brain tumor could exact upon her. But all of a sudden, simply because of simply having the medication, that terror vanished. Brittany had taken control back from the tumor. The tumor could no longer torture her to death. Brittany held a trump card that the tumor could not defeat. A quote I found: "To conquer fear is the beginning of wisdom." And another one: "Wisdom is antithetical to fear. In fact, it's what enables a person to overcome fear." Brittany was wise beyond measure for deciding to fight the cancer from Oregon. Her determination to fear less is an accomplishment that I fully understood the value of upon seeing the change in Brittany's outlook from that point on. She was empowered and in control. And when you're facing death, that's huge. I keep in my heart all of the good times we shared together. Everything from the details of our first date to just sitting on the couch next to one another watching a movie, our wedding day, our honeymoon. All of those events play out in my memory, and they make me smile. We've all heard it said, don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. I choose to smile. By the way, if you've never heard that quote, you need to brush up on your Dr. Seuss. I made a promise to Brittany to do what I can to help pass legislation so no one else has to move from their home in order to secure a gentle passing. I continue to work on that effort. Brittany's voice made a huge difference in this conversation on end-of-life options. Governor Jerry Brown's statement in California mentioned Brittany by name as one of the factors that he took into consideration while deliberating signing the law. This year alone, 25 states have introduced or will be introducing legislation. It just goes to show that one voice truly can make a difference. Brittany's voice certainly did. Brittany died gently on November 1st of last year. Within 5 minutes of taking the medication, she fell asleep very peacefully. Within 30 minutes, her breathing slowed to the point where she passed away. It was truly one of the gentlest passings that one could hope for. The brain tumor would not have allowed for that. Brittany's story is a story of love. It's a story of determination. It's a story of living life. And it's a story of triumph. In the end, Brittany did not die as a victim to cancer. She died in the same manner that she lived her life, with grace, compassion, and love for herself and for her family. On behalf of Brittany, I give my thanks to each and every one of you, to Compassionate Choices. Thank you for being a part of this effort. Thank you for the countless hours of work, for your contributions, and for sharing your compassion with one another.
We have a saying that we say a lot within our organization, and that's that we're all just one experience away from becoming supporters of this movement. A personal experience, an experience with a loved one, an experience with a friend, or maybe the experience of coming to a room full of 350 people and watching someone speak so honestly. Thank you, Dan. At this time, I want you to pull out that little card that I asked you to pull out earlier. And if today was one of those experiences, or if you've had one of those experiences, I want you to go ahead and write on that a gift that's meaningful to you. And seal up the envelope and place it in the white bag that's on your table, and our staff will be around to pick those up. From the bottom of my heart, I thank every last one of you for being here and for the support that you've shown this organization and this cause. It means everything. Have a wonderful day.